Agreement framework. We have more details of a possible deal with Iran to limit its nuclear production. Defeating ISIS. The Bishop of Erbil calls for a military option to alleviate persecution by the Islamic State. Giving credit. Pope Francis encourages Japanese bishops, saying Japanese Christians are models for the world. And a first in 4 years, Europeans experience a rare total solar eclipse, but the Arctic gets the best view. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, March 20th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. An agreement with Iran on nuclear production is close. That comes from the Russian top negotiator, who says some problems still remain. And a week after Republican senators sent a message to Iran's leader, the president sends a message of his own. Jason Calvi is here with more.
Brian, the president says nuclear negotiations are progressing. He's also asking Iran to release an American pastor in jail. It comes as Iran and 6 world powers take a break from nuclear talks. In a message from the White House today, President Obama wishes Iranians a happy new year and warns the people there if their leaders cannot reach a reasonable nuclear deal, they will continue to suffer.
They will keep Iran on the path it's on today, a path that has isolated Iran and the Iranian people from so much of the world, caused so much hardship for Iranian families.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been negotiating with Iran's foreign minister.
I hope this new day will be a new day for the entire world.
A deadline of the end of the month looms for a preliminary agreement.
I think a deal is possible any time. It depends on the political will, whether there is a political will to reach one.
But the negotiations are on hold in Switzerland so the Iranians can attend a funeral.
We're recessing the talks.
And when will you rejoin?
We'll be back next week.
Here in Lausanne.
We made a lot of progress, yes, here.
Secretary Kerry will be meeting with his European counterparts this weekend. Some negotiators say the U.S. and Iran have talked about a deal in which Iran would cut 40% of the number of machines that could make an atomic bomb, and Iran would then get some relief from sanctions. In a written statement, President Obama says Iran should immediately release Americans imprisoned in that country, including Pastor Saeed Abedini, jailed for his faith for almost 2.5 years. The U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom says the case of Pastor Abedini has been brought up on the sidelines of the nuclear talks. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu warned Congress that the nuclear deal paves Iran's path to the bomb. Brian?
Jason Calvi, thank you. And the Speaker of the House will personally congratulate Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on his election victory this week. Speaker John Boehner angered the White House by inviting Netanyahu to address a joint session of Congress earlier this month. A Boehner aide insists the Speaker's Jerusalem visit was planned before that speech. The Ohio Republican will travel to Israel during the congressional recess that begins March 30th. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The death toll is rising from today's suicide bombing at 2 mosques in Yemen's capital. A group claiming to be a Yemeni branch of ISIS takes responsibility. At least 137 people have died. Hundreds more are injured. Doctors are being urged to go to hospitals to help treat survivors. Houthi rebels, who are rivals to ISIS, recently seized control of Yemen's capital city. Yemen's president fled, and foreign embassies suspended operations in the city after that takeover. The 2 gunmen who opened fire on a museum in Tunis were trained in Libya. That's according to a Tunisian security official. 21 people died, mostly European tourists, before the gunmen were killed by security forces. Pope Francis offers prayers for those victims. In a telegram to the Archbishop of Tunis, the Pope decries the attacks as an act against peace and the sacredness of human life. The Holy Father assures the families and others affected by the attack of his continued prayers. They held a moment of silence in Spain today. Barcelona's mayor and others honored the 2 Spaniards killed in that attack. Meanwhile, in Tunis, defiant citizens celebrate Independence Day. Thousands rally in support of separation from France 59 years ago. A Chaldean Catholic church leader in Iraq says the only way to stop ISIS is with violence. Archbishop Bashar Warda of Erbil says a war against ISIS is needed. He says it's the only way to keep radical Islamists from destroying Christianity in his country. He tells 60 Minutes the Islamic State is a cancer.
Sometimes you take some hard measures, unfortunate measures, to deal and to treat this cancer.
So you want to see a major military offensive?
Yeah, to get Iraq to its normal situation.
The Archbishop's flock has grown by 60,000 in recent months as Christians from other parts of Iraq take refuge there. The Islamic State's push across Syria and Iraq threatens communities and traditions thousands of years old. For Iraq's Christians forced to flee, the threat extends to their very existence as a people. 27-year-old Saba Abed says she is surviving, but she can hardly call this a life. Remembering the life she once had, Saba breaks down. It was beautiful, she says. For now, this is home for her and more than 50 other Christian families driven out of the northern city of Mosul by ISIS last year. They found sanctuary in this abandoned school in Baghdad. With support from the church and aid groups, they are getting by. Everyone in this small community has a story of loss and suffering, but most are too scared to speak. Iraq's Christian community, once estimated at more than 1 million, has dwindled to a third of that since the U.S.-led invasion in 2003, prompting many to flee. For years, they've been targets of extremist groups. Many of those who defied the threats and stayed say they no longer can. My message to the Pope, she says, is we are worthless in this country. Get us out of here. Save us from this country. We don't belong here anymore. The latest news from home came from ISIS releasing these photos on Monday, vandalizing a church, taking down a cross and replacing it with the group's black flag of terror. Saba is emotional and angry looking at the pictures. This is the monastery we liked and visited, she says. Why are they doing this to the churches? May God punish the evil monsters, she says. Others, like Father Martin Daywood, say ISIS has done worse.
I felt very bad, but it's not like when I saw our families leaving their houses and leaving their properties and giving it to ISIS. It hurt me more than seeing these crosses being fallen from the churches and destroying our culture or our history in Mosul. We can rebuild the history, but it's very difficult to rebuild the human.
Forcing Christians out of their homes was not enough. ISIS seems determined to wipe every trace of Christianity in the land it now rules.
If ISIS continues, I think this is the last chapter of the book of Christianity or minorities living in Iraq or Middle East.
The Christian identity under threat in the Middle East, the land where it was born more than 2,000 years ago. And Christians in Pakistan's eastern city of Lahore react violently to deadly attacks on their communities. Taliban suicide bombers targeted 2 churches in Lahore earlier this week. More than a dozen people died and dozens more were wounded. In the aftermath, enraged mobs lash out, burning a suspected terrorist to death. Mike Kugelman is Senior Program Associate for Southeast Asia at the Wilson Center. Mike, Christians make up just a very small minority, about 3% of Pakistan's population. Why attack Christian churches?
Well, actually, Pakistan has almost 200 million people, so 2 or 3% of the population, it's quite a few Christians. But essentially, the Taliban wants to overthrow the Pakistani state and replace it with a strict Islamist theocracy, and there's no room for Christians in that theocracy, or Hindus, or Shia Muslims either. So all religious minorities are really forbidden when it comes to how the Taliban thinks about things.
Now, you've raised some concerns that this latest bombing could lead to civil war. Why do you say that?
Well, I think the concern is that this bombing and its aftermath has set a new precedent where these aggrieved and heavily traumatized and discriminated against and targeted religious minorities have retaliated violently. And I think the concern now is that when, for example, Shia Muslims are attacked, they constitute 20% of Pakistan. If they're attacked, they will retaliate violently, and that this could beget some sort of cycle of violence. And I'm not saying civil war is going to come anytime soon, but it certainly is something to worry about.
The Taliban certainly has been running free in Pakistan. Is its grip tightening, though, on that population, on that country?
I don't think so. I mean, there's been a lot of drone strikes over the years. There have been Pakistani military offensives that have weakened the group. But at the same time, this is a group that maintains the capacity to carry out large-scale attacks that kill dozens and dozens of people. I mean, remember what happened in Peshawar a few months ago, attack on a school by the Taliban that killed more than 100 kids.
So we generally equate the Taliban with Afghanistan because of the long war that we had there. So now ISIS has its eye on Afghanistan. Will ISIS and the Taliban cooperate, or will they oppose each other?
Well, for now, they're rivals. The Taliban is very close to al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is the group that ISIS broke off from. So they're rivals in that sense. But then again, they're cut from the same cloth. They have the same ideological views. And if we look back at the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, there's a possibility there that there were collaborations between militants from al-Qaeda and from ISIS. So I think this Taliban-ISIS collaboration idea, it's remote, but who knows? It could happen one day.
And scary. Now, the president of Afghanistan is in Washington to meet with President Obama next week. Do you think this is going to be the center of their discussion?
Well, I think it certainly plays a role in what will likely be a decision of President Obama to slow down the troop drawdown. I think there's a rising concern that not only a strong Taliban insurgency, but also a rising influence and presence of ISIS in Afghanistan is leading the White House to think, well, we need to slow down this withdrawal. The Afghans really need our help, given these types of threats.
We'll see. Mike Kugelman with the Wilson Center, thanks so much for helping us understand this a little bit better.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Japan's early Christians can inspire present-day Catholics in that Asian nation. Pope Francis shares that message with Japanese bishops visiting the Vatican this week. The Holy Father recalled how St. Francis Xavier and his companions were steadfast in their faith through persecution. He says these hidden Christians encourages all Christians to persevere through every trial. Francis also says we are all called to evangelize, not just missionaries. Pope Francis accepts the resignation of Scottish Cardinal Keith Patrick O'Brien from rights and duties as a cardinal. Cardinal O'Brien stepped down as Archbishop of St. Andrews in Edinburgh 2 years ago. He's since admitted his sexual conduct has fallen below standards expected of a priest. It is very rare for a pope to approve a cardinal's resignation. O'Brien's successor, Archbishop Leo Cushley, welcomes the Holy Father's decision. He says Cardinal O'Brien's behavior distressed many. It demoralized faithful Catholics, and it made the Church less credible to those who are not Catholic. He continues, I hope now that all of us affected by this sad and regrettable episode will embrace a spirit of forgiveness, the only spirit that can heal any bitterness and hurt that still remains. Pope Francis names a new successor to the apostles for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. He's appointed Father Mario Dorsonville as an auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese. The bishop-elect was born in Colombia. He was ordained a priest in 1985 and now serves Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese and the Spanish Catholic Center. He'll serve migrants and the Hispanic community as an auxiliary bishop and help Cardinal Donald Wuerl.
There is a sense of joy, but there is also sense of fear because you feel humble, and this is such a responsibility that is going to be on your shoulders that you just pray. Little by little you get confidence as you begin to see that this is God's will.
Cardinal Wuerl thanked the Holy Father for this appointment. He says it's one more sign of the Pope's love for the Church and his love for God's people. Dorsonville will be ordained a bishop on April 20th here in Washington. Coming up, Catholics in India pray for peace and justice after the brutal attack of a nun in her convent. And Europeans are treated to a rare total eclipse of the sun, the first in 4 years. Thank you for joining us for EWTN News Nightly on this 20th of March, a Friday evening, and a rare look at a solar eclipse as spring begins this evening. That's the moon's shadow falling across the sun. It's the first total eclipse of the sun in 4 years. The eclipse could be seen in North Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Pope Francis calls the death penalty inadmissible. He says there is no humane way to carry out a death sentence. In a letter to the International Commission Against the Death Penalty, Pope Francis says, quote, with the application of the death penalty, the convict is denied the possibility to repent or make amends for the harm caused. The possibility of confession, by which a man expresses his inner conversion, and contrition, the gateway to atonement and expiation, to reach an encounter with God's merciful and healing justice. He goes on to say that the death penalty is often used by despots and extremists to exterminate those seen as a threat to their power. This week's brutal attack and rape of a 71-year-old nun in India highlights two major concerns there: sexual violence against women and the targeting of Christians. Wyatt Goolsby shows us the reaction of the Catholic community in West Bengal.
calls for prayer and justice. Even in this sanctuary of worship 50 miles from Calcutta, home of Mother Teresa, not untouched by the horror that's befallen this small town in eastern India. This week, a 71-year-old nun was allegedly raped. The convent and chapel where she worked, ransacked. It's something here no one is able to fathom.
We are virgins, and for us very important. We have given up marriage, and so a consecrated person is assaulted is very, very painful.
Authorities say no assumptions should be made and no theory ruled out. Still, some of India's top Christian leaders are hinting towards a larger and perhaps more sinister motivation, hurting the religious sentiments of Indian Christians.
The chapel that is being desecrated, because where we have got the Holy Communion and all, that they have spilled all over the floor and all, and they have taken the ciborium. From there I see that they don't have that only come for robbery, is something deeper than that.
This recent incident comes amid a series of attacks on churches across India. Many Christians in this community are scared to talk. I heard the guard yelling for help. He said, "We're tied up," and one sister had been raped. I then grabbed others from the community and we broke open the lock. I saw the nun who had been raped. She was crying heavily, she says. Kind, loving, humble. That's how many who knew the 71-year-old nun describe her. She reportedly wants to forgive her attackers. But the anger inside is only growing, frustrated by how long the investigation is taking, shocked at just how daring, horrendous, and commonplace attacks like this one have become. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, a Christian couple gets a huge family, taking in 39 orphans from Honduras. And different is normal, a theme for tomorrow's World Down Syndrome Day. World Down Syndrome Day is celebrated tomorrow, the 21st day of the third month. That date is symbolic. It symbolizes the genetic abnormality that causes Down syndrome, trisomy 21. French geneticist Jerome Lejeune helped discover that in 1958. That eventually led to his crusade against abortion. Thanks for joining us on this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Mark Bradford is president of the Jerome Lejeune Foundation USA, and tomorrow, of course, is World Down Syndrome Day. How do you think Dr. Lejeune would like to see that observed?
He would love it, first of all. Yeah. To know that the discovery that he had made had given such dignity to individuals, that there's now a day set aside worldwide to celebrate these people's lives, he would rejoice in that. I think he would really want people, though, to understand that we still have an incredible problem around the topic of Down syndrome, and that's the effect that prenatal diagnosis has on the abortion statistics, and that would greatly trouble him.
So many babies that are found to have Down syndrome are aborted, in some cases up to 90-some%.
Yeah, they say the weighted mean, the latest research says the weighted mean across the U.S. is about 67%, but some regions of the country are 93-94%.
What is your foundation doing to try to bring awareness to this?
Well, the Jerome Lejeune Foundation's mission is threefold, and the mission of the foundation really is to perpetuate the legacy of Jerome Lejeune. So research, certainly to improve the lives of individuals with Down syndrome. We provide medical care services and also advocacy, which is a very strong component. And we're always trying to make people aware of the threat that exists as a result of emerging technologies, more sophisticated technologies in prenatal diagnosis.
So being different is normal is a theme of a new video that you produce. We're going to show a truncated version of that. Just take a look at this.
Great.
I know I'm different. I'm not like everyone else. The principal reassures me that if anyone laughs at me, I should come see her and talk with her. I know the teacher is going to stand in front of the whole class and say to everyone that I'm new and that I'm different than everyone else. And then she's going to ask the other students to make me feel welcomed.
How beautiful. So you put us in the shoes of someone who is always treated and looked at as different, and yet you see the beautiful joy on those faces.
Yeah, yeah.
What kind of feedback are you getting to this?
Incredibly positive. People are right back. I think we've had about 130,000 views at this point between our foundation office in Paris and the work we've done here promoting the English language version. Overwhelmingly positive. People writing that they're in tears, requests to translate into Portuguese, Croatian, Polish, Spanish, which is going on right now. So
maybe we can double those views tonight. So just
Let's do that.
Check that out. You're also launching a memorial fund. Tell us about the man who is honored by this fund.
Incredible story. This is a man named Thomas Vanderwoody, who was a retired Vietnam fighter pilot, commercial airline pilot, lived on a farm in Virginia with his family, father of 7 sons. His youngest son had Down syndrome. They were working on the family farm together, and the youngest son, Josie, fell into the septic tank. Tom Vanderwoody jumped into the tank to save his son's life, and as he was holding him up out of the sewage to rescue him, he himself died.
So he sacrificed his own life for this son, showing the value of every human life.
The value of every human life, exactly.
That's beautiful. Just let our viewers know where they can connect with your foundation and help with this cause.
Sure. We're at lejeuneUSA.org, LEJEUNE USA.org.
All right. Thank you. Mark Bradford, president of the Jerome Lejeune Foundation USA.
Thanks very much.
And of course, remember that tomorrow is World Down Syndrome Day. To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. That verse from Micah 6:8 inspires an amazing home in Honduras. Our Catherine Zeltner reports.
At this home, life seems to never be boring. There's always someone who wants to tell a secret, more than a few willing to sing a song. How are you today? And many who frequently enjoy collective hugs. There's a father, like in many homes.
From the get-go, we tell them, we are your parents.
There's also a mother.
For me and my husband, these are our kids.
But what catches people's attention is the number of children at this home in El Progreso, Honduras.
We go to all the meetings with the judges. We have meetings with any government official, even down to grocery shopping, everything.
Jacob Cherian, an American from New York, and his Canadian wife Melody left everything behind in the United States in 2009 to move to Honduras. They're taking care of 39 abandoned, neglected, abused, and orphaned children. They would like to adopt them all, but the Honduran government doesn't allow it.
I've committed to raising them, to being their mother. Whether the government will let me adopt them or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, if they would say, here's the adoption papers for 39 children, we would do it.
The home is called Micah 6:8, after a verse in the Bible.
Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
We made a commitment that we were going to stay here and raise our kids until they were adults.
That means a couple of decades, at least. The children are now getting a first-class education and proper nutrition. But the Cherians say those are not the most important things.
And we tell the kids, yeah, we're a little weird. We have a big family, but you have a mom and dad, and you're always going to have that.
A promise that the missionaries hope will change the children's lives forever. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. No doubt those lives are changed. Until Monday, we invite you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch on YouTube on EWTN's website. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and hello, spring. Have a good weekend. Good night, and God bless you.